When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Night. User: 99Hugh. Posted May 1st, 1996.
What good is a painter who can't paint? How is someone meant to spend their time when the one thing that used to be their life's purpose has become dangerous to them? More than dangerous even, fatal. These are questions I never thought I'd have to ask myself. My family tends to be a long-lived and healthy one, I would say. Why shouldn't I expect to keep putting brush to canvas right up until the very end? All the while, the night was coming, bringing with him the end of everything I've ever known. I was lucky enough to have experienced both critical and commercial success early on in my career. One of my largest landscapes, Cold Spring Harbor 4 a.m., was featured heavily in a major feature film nominated for several Academy Awards. This led to a lot of commission work, print sales, and so on. Enough I was able to buy this house and acreage 40 minutes outside Providence, converting the barn into a beautiful working studio and display space. That high leveled out, as they always do, but left me with enough money to live comfortably without having to sell a new piece every single week. This was my life for almost 20 years, prior to having the first dream. I was standing on a hilltop as a thunderstorm raged. Above, lightning split the black sky, and below, a brutal massacre was unfolding. Soldiers dressed in red and white were charging en masse against a lone rider, what appeared to be a medieval knight, visor down over his eyes. The knight dismounted, his sword drawn, moving with terrifying speed as he plunged the blade over and over into the charging men. Their insides spilled out to stain the ground a deep red, organs trampled flat. Some were beheaded so quickly it seemed as though their heads simply popped off their necks. In the end, the valley was ankle-deep in gore. Only the rider remained. A viscous black rain began to fall, rippling the red pool in which he stood. He raised his head, appearing to look directly at me. Something about the movement made me ill, and I awoke in bed, clutching my stomach. I barely made it to the bathroom before being explosively sick. Painting, for me, was always kind of a meditation. Once I'd found a groove, I could stay there for hours, day turning to night before so much as a glance up from my work. It wasn't a fugue state, just an intense stretch of focus. So when things I hadn't intended to paint started showing up in my work, you can imagine my confusion. The Cape May Lighthouse wreathed in fog, a solitary beam of light extending outward, and there, next to the lamp, a shadowy figure. I had no memory of painting it, yet there it was. Another canvas, another subject, this time the green in Woodstock, Vermont, as seen on Christmas Eve. The figure was closer now, seemingly caught mid-step on one of the footpaths that bisected the painting. Its proximity allowed for no misidentification. It was unmistakably the knight, his visor still firmly shut over his face. Nausea swarmed over me so swiftly I failed to make it to the bathroom. After cleaning up my mess, I burned the Woodstock piece rather than complete it, foolishly thinking the act would bring whatever this was to an end. If only. I didn't paint for several days after that. Instead, I tried to tease apart what was happening in my mind. Was the night part of some inner symbolism, a subconscious warning of coming illness? It sounds unlikely, but it wouldn't be the first time I've heard of such a thing. I scheduled a doctor's visit and received a clean bill of health. As if to make a point, that night brought with it this second dream. I was on an endless sea, floating alone in a wooden rowboat, its oarlocks empty. The only sounds I could hear were the gentle lap of waves. Slowly, I became aware of a vibration running the length of the boat, shaking me to my core. All around me, the sea began to oscillate so fast it blurred. Dread bloomed in my chest, spreading throughout my body, weighed me down like stones. An enormous rushing sound drew my attention to a distant point ahead, an island breaking through the surface. When it began to catch the moonlight, I finally recognized it for what it was. The knight's hood, blown up to titanic proportions. Higher and higher, it rose into the sky, occupying the entire horizon. I watched helplessly as it swung a hand down toward me, its shadow engulfing me. Air rushed as the steel glove drew closer, crushing my skull before driving my dying body below the Black Sea. I awoke with a fever that refused to abate for several days. After this, I attempted 2 more paintings, each meant to be placid, pastoral scenes, each ruined by an approaching rider of whom I had no memory of creating. The second, Patterson Great Falls at sunrise, should have been my crowning achievement. Previously, I'd struggled to capture motion. I was a still life artist through and through, but those falls, they inspired me to try harder, and though it may be gauche to say so, I did an exceptional job of depicting their power and grace. The only problem was him, the thing of my nightmares, rising up out of the water at river's edge. His visor also benefited from my newfound skill at motion. It was in the process of rising, exposing a face that was unspeakably grotesque, and so that piece too saw the fire rather than the gallery wall. It has been a year since I burned Patterson Great Falls at sunrise, and in that year I have done no painting and had the same number of dreams about the night. You may believe this to be a coincidence, however, I know it to be true. How? Because the handful of times I've dared to so much as pick up my brush, I felt that bloom of dread, alongside its twin ghosts of nausea and fever. They're waiting for me to give in, to lose the fight against my self-preservation and create again, to open up a conduit through which the night can be born into our world. I refuse, no matter the cost.
Subject: The Hanging Tree. User: Misa12. Posted April 4th, 1998.
There is something pure about turning soil with your bare hands. How it spreads and mixes, worming its way under your fingernails. It's like communion with the earth, a blessing for you and you alone. Because of this, I like to dig graves with my hands as often as possible. It completes the circuit between the beginning of the act, the moment their jugular blooms for me like a scarlet flower, and the end, when the remains return to the earth. I won't lie and pretend my reasons for killing are spiritual. I simply enjoy it. As some collect baseball cards or play squash, I pick up hitchhiking young men and see how far away from their proposed destination I can take them before they get suspicious. The answer is always farther than you think. Here at my house is largely where the killing happens. I enjoy the struggle, the look of surprise as they realize life is draining from them. They can't speak by this point, but the look in their eyes says everything. This can't be happening to me, can it? Death is an inevitability for all of us, and yet it still comes as a surprise to everyone who has died in my halls. Once the final spasms have passed, I drag their bodies into my kitchen where the chest freezer awaits. Should you ever find yourself in a situation where you must dispose of a body, know that dismemberment is easiest when they are frozen. A day in a properly set chest freezer should do the trick. Once my little friends are nice and cold, it's relatively easy work with a hacksaw to do what needs to be done. From there, I bag the pieces in burlap and hike them out to my special place. A clearing deep in the forest where no one ever goes. There, as I said, I bury them with my own two hands, cleaving the earth like a farmer to plant my wayward seeds. For whatever reason, the need which drives me has long been dormant in winter, leaving me the summer months to look for new friends along the highway. Then, this past year, everything changed. That compulsion and itch deep within me flared into life as I sat at my kitchen table, watching snow pile up outside. It didn't concern me. The muse strikes when it will, and to my surprise, there was no shortage of candidates with their thumbs out. Summer brings strangers, iterant fruit pickers, lost souls looking for somewhere to belong. Winter drives away everyone but locals, and the last thing I wanted was to draw attention. To be certain of anonymity, I extended my usual radius by a good 50 miles. My first new friend was only 19, a beautiful, pale, red-headed boy with a pedestrian name I can't be bothered to remember. He barely fought at all, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment to arrive. Even his frozen skin seemed to give way to the saw's teeth more easily than any of the others. The pieces went into a fresh sack, and I began my trek out into the woods. Not having harvested in the winter months before, I failed to account for the hardness of frozen ground. To my great annoyance, it wouldn't give way in the slightest, and I found myself unsure of what to do. I had never before walked a sack in and out of my special place, and the sheer unprecedented nature of the act upset me for reasons I can't explain. After some time, I came up with a compromise, scaling a tree at the clearing's edge and hanging the bag from its highest branch. I reasoned it would keep the contents safe from predators, what few might be about in winter. The urge returned again and again through December and into January. I harvested with an intensity that did nothing to quell the desire inside me. Each burst of arterial blood across the wall of my workshop was like fireworks, dazzling while leaving me wanting ever more. The collection of sacks in my special clearing grew until the topmost boughs of my hanging tree began to sag under their weight. I would stand there and marvel at its majesty, the way it creaked gently in the breeze. It felt significant, though exactly why, I couldn't say, at least not yet. It was Gregory who showed me the way. Gregory, whose sad face and hunched shoulders I spotted 100 feet away from the Holiday Station store where he was waiting for a ride. When I failed to go the direction I promised, it was as if the air had gone out of him. I thought it meant he was giving up, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Gregory fought me every step of the way, heavy punches landing against my ribs and face. One flattened my nose, immediately blackening my eyes. Almost blind and acting purely on instinct, I swung my heavy knife towards his head, feeling a satisfying thunk as it struck home. He went limp, his bowels voiding as he died. No one had ever hurt me so badly. Raw emotion, anger, and embarrassment throbbed in time with my wounds. Being unable to raise my arms enough to lift his body into the deep freeze added insult to injury. After stewing for a moment, I understood I needed to make a decision quickly before too much stiffness set into my shoulders. He couldn't stay inside, that was obvious, or on my land where anyone might stumble across him. No, I decided he belonged in my special place where he could freeze at the base of the hanging tree. Quickly, I bound his ankles with heavy rope, looping the other end around my chest as a makeshift harness. By this point, I was fully feeling the beating Gregory had delivered, and my legs were the only part of me I trusted to work as needed. I began the long trudge into the forest. Approaching the hanging tree, I felt a difference in the air. It vibrated in a way I'd never known, almost in expectation. And then I saw it, the carrion god I hadn't known I'd been waiting for, high up in the tree, something that looked like a gorilla but with impossibly long arms was licking the red-stained burlap sacks with a prehensile tongue. I gasped, and it heard me, letting out a guttural screech before scuttling down the tree like a spider. It skittered up on all fours, dwarfing me by several feet. The skin of its face was black, stretched tight over a skull so thick it may as well have been armored. It could have killed me with a single swipe of its thick arms, but instead, it sniffed and snuffled the air. I should have been frightened, but instead was exhilarated. It crab-walked in a semicircle, bulging eyes scanning up and down until it was at my rear, squealing in excitement. There was a tug on my harness. It wanted Gregory. Gently, I pulled the loop of rope over my head and turned to face the being, which was running its head up and down the dead man's leg like a kitten. I slowly stepped back, gesturing toward the corpse like an offering. The ape spider understood, bellowing to the sky before tearing into the body with its powerful claws. There was a crack of bone and sinew as one of Gregory's legs was torn free, flaps of ragged pink flesh briefly visible before razor-sharp teeth stripped it down to the bone. It was a terrific, wonderful display of brutality, and I understood what had awakened the hunger in months that had heretofore remained dormant. This carrion god had summoned me to the hanging tree to serve as its right hand, and I was only too happy to oblige.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.